Israelites' exodus from wandering in the wilderness under the favor of God and under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. We'll be jumping around a bit in our books. Some we'll be studying some from Numbers and Leviticus. And if you've been paying attention to the labeling of some of these books, of course, last quarter we studied Genesis, which means beginning, and Exodus, which obviously the Greek word is exit, so it's Israel leaving Egypt. Leviticus, we studied about the tribe of Levi and the priests. So it affects a lot of the things for the priests to do. Numbers, we'll talk a little bit more about today, about a census being taken, or accounting. And Deuteronomy, which we'll study later on in the quarter, is the second giving of the law. It's not a different law, it's just labored more towards the people and less so towards the Levites, or the tribe of priests. So, you may have picked up on that yourself. Many of y'all probably already know that, but I wanted to refresh y'all's memory on that. So we've been at Mount Sinai for a while in our story. Some of the things that happened. God made a covenant with Israel. The Ten Commandments were spoken. Moses was gone for 40 days. The Israelites sinned and make the golden calf and are corrected for that sin. Moses has to go for 40 days again and receive the law anew. We talked a lot about the tabernacle being built and set up and the priests being consecrated. And we talked a lot about the laws that were given, feasts that were ordered, that they were to partake of. The last one, we talked about the Passover, which was just recently in our story, taken for the second time. Some of the particulars I want to bring up. Y'all remember the priests were to offer sacrifices daily for the people's sins. So that was a job that went on a lot. Before they could even do that, they had to offer sacrifices for their sins before they could serve the Lord. The commandments, which were written on tablets of stone, were placed in the ark, and they were put in the holiest of holy place in the tabernacle. Once they were placed in there, they were only seen once a year by the high priest. They had a veil in front of it, a solid single-piece veil that separated the holiest of holy place from the holy place. They were doing sacrifices with a lot of sprinkling of much blood around the altar, burnt offering, place of smearing blood on the horns of that altar, and also on the altar of incense inside. The priests were washing themselves in a water basin or laver outside before they'd enter the holy place. And then they had the call to attend the Feast of Passover. If y'all remember from a couple lessons ago what would happen for those that failed to attend or were negligent. They had a second opportunity, but they were not to be negligent in that. So with that, we want to do one of our reverse reviews, okay? So everybody turn to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10, read with me. Starting at verse 11. And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices which can never take away sin. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. From that time waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. By one offering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. But the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us. For after he had said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them. After those days, says the Lord, I'll put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. And he adds, their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. And where there is remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us through the veil that is his flesh. having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart, full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope, without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. See the parallels there that we have studied before and how they apply to us today. Forsaking the assembly goes back to that second observance of the Passover. And telling them, you need to be there. If you're not there, you have the second chance. If you're not there, you're to be cast out. You're to die. So that's makes it more significant today, knowing the story in the past, the importance of us coming to worship. It's expected of us. We need to do that. Okay? So let's get to our studies. This lesson, we're going to look soldiers being numbered and organized. The Levites were numbered, organized, and consecrated. Yes, sir.
That they could do. But it was not just if they wanted to stay away. It was for a specific reason. That they were unclean is the reason they could not. God wouldn't permit them to observe that Passover. And we need to be careful that we don't leave the pressure. Whatever reason you want to just not pretend something morning. Whatever.
Right. And that's a good point, Fred. Circumstances beyond their control got them in a situation where they could not do it as they were supposed to. If they were expected to, on that first case, if they any way they could, they were expected to attempt to observe the Passover. The circumstances happen, and for us today, if you're sick in the morning, but you can come in the evening, that's kind of expected of you. So, you need to be careful. It didn't give the Israelites an excuse. It's just God recognized that there were circumstances that prevented them from observing that first Passover, and they could observe it later. Good point. All right. We'll look at some blessings and curses that God tells the Israelites, and then it's time to leave Sinai. We've been there for a while in several of our lessons. Okay. So, this is in Numbers 1 through 46. So it's about a month after the tabernacle set up. And the Lord tells Moses that every male above 20, and that is fit for war, he needs a count. Moses and Aaron were to do the counting, and one prince from each of the tribes was to assist. I think it even lists the priest's name. We won't go into that. But the results, as y'all scan down through here, some of y'all may have read this. This is the part where I ask questions, and y'all volunteer the answers, I'll say. So how many tribes were counted? Waiting. Somebody's going to say it. Still waiting. How many tribes? Huh? 11. They mentioned 12. The Levites weren't counted, but there were 12 tribes counted. Remember, one of them was sons of Joseph, which were who? Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, so there's 12 tribes counted. All right. That was the wine part. Largest tribe. Read this, you may know that. What was the largest tribe that was counted? I know Marcia knows. What was it, Marcia? Judah. Judah was the largest tribe. Tribe not counted was, y'all mentioned that, Levi. They weren't counted at this time. They'll be counted later for a different reason. this was the counting of the soldiers, the people that were able to war, right? Total was, I know the total. 603,550 able-bodied men who could fight. Okay, that's a pretty good size of numbers. So that gives you an idea of how big this group of people was. These people, men 20 and above, who were old enough to fight, but not too old to fight. Who were in good shape, weren't sick or lame or things of that nature. So this is a large group of people that have to be handled. All right. The arrangements of the camps. Well, they'll camp around the tabernacle with a standard for the tribe and a banner for the family. And the way I think about that is we have a standard for our nation, which is the American flag, and our banner for our states would be our state flags that can be flown under, right? So you have a standard for the tribe and a banner for each of the families represented. They were given marching orders also for moving out. This is some of the wisdom of God, but let's look at the arrangement real quick of the camps. On the east side, you had Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. So the east side, if y'all recall, is the way the tabernacle and the courtyard faced. It faced east. So these were in front of the gate, the front curtain, where they could go in. This was known as the Camp of Judah. At 186,400 able-bodied men. And they would be the first to move out. Okay, so you got that many men up at the lead, and it was time to move. On the south side, you have Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. This was the camp of Reuben, 151,450 men. And they would leave out after the camp of Judah. So you've got a pretty good crowd of folks leading these two camps. Next, the tabernacle or the tent of meeting would be moved out. It was to be moved out next with the camp of the Levites. We'll talk a little bit more about where the Levites camp in just a minute. But it's in the same order as they camped, each under his own flag. The Levites, a bit more about that in a minute. On the west side, so you have the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Reuben, tabernacle, and then you have on the west side Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. That was the camp of Ephraim, 108,100 soldiers. It was after the tabernacle and the Levites. And then on the north side, you had the tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. This is the camp of Dan, 157,600 men, and they brought up the rear. So you got a bunch of men in front, able-bodied 5 men, the tabernacle, and a bunch of men in the back. So it was well protected. Remember, we talked about how much was in there, how much gold and silver and stuff. It's worth a lot. Y'all remember back when we studied after they crossed the Red Sea, they were being marauded by a group of people. Who remembers who that was? Amalekites. The Amalekites, if y'all remember, the Sinai Peninsula was wilderness. And they weren't threatened by somebody moving into their space, because nobody lived there. The Amalekites knew that they'd left Egypt holding a lot of loot. And so it was easy for them to try to pick off, the weak and the ones falling behind and try to get their loot. And of course, this is where Moses called on God's help, and who went into battle against the Amalekites? Joshua led the battle against the Amalekites. This is where Aaron and Hur held up Moses. He held up the rod, and they fall off the Amalekites. And God promised that he'd take care of them later. They were trying to steal what he had planned for the tabernacle. That wasn't he wouldn't want to let that fly. So they were after the gold and the silver that they had looted, or that they had been given by the Egyptians. They were hoping to loot that from the Israelites. But now, see, God has got this going out in order, well protected. So to see this encampment leave with all these men, and remember the cloud leading them, and the fire, I don't think anybody was going to attack them. And with all that protection. So here we got a picture. I don't know if you can see it that well. You probably can't read it at all, but we're showing the tabernacle and the fence around it, the white curtain. This would be the east because that was where the colored curtain or entrance was. Camp of Judah. What was the second camp of Ephraim? Is that right? Nope, that's wrong. What's the second one? Reuben, that's right, thank you. Ephraim's on the west side, and then Dan on the east side. See some more little tents around here, which we're just about to talk about. Levites numbered and organized. So they're not in the soldier census, but and they'll be appointed to be in charge of the tabernacles and the furnishings. So they're the ones to do the takedown and the setup of the tabernacle. No one else was to do that. If somebody else was caught trying to help, they were put to death. So that was their duty. Clans of the Levites. Numbers 3, 1 through 4, and 17 through 20. This is, we kind of go down through the genealogy of Levi. He had 3 sons, Gershon with 2 clans. These are the families. Kohath with 4 clans, and Merari with 2 clans. Okay, so those are the 3 main clans of the Levites. If you follow the clan of Kohath, under him is Amram, was born to Kohath, and he's the father of Miriam, which has been a while since we've talked about Miriam, but she's still around, Aaron, and Moses. A little bit further, following Amram through Aaron, his sons were Nadab and Abihu, who are now deceased because of their offering a strange fire to the Lord. These were the priests. Then we have Eleazar, and Ithamar. Okay. So as we stated before, Aaron's the high priest, set up as the high priest. Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons, did the priest duties. But the Levites aren't priests, but the priests are Levites. Okay. So they're presented to Aaron, Numbers 3, verses 5 through 10, by Moses. They're to do the work of the tabernacle. They're to take care of the furnishings. Now, we think about them just moving out, but stuff. These ladies that have silver knows what happens to silver after about a week, right? What happens to it? It tarnishes. It turns black. So this stuff has to be polished. So that's where some of the work they would be doing. They'd be polishing silver. They'd be polishing brass to keep it shiny. Gold doesn't have to be polished. So they're taking care of this stuff. After time, if they're set up for a while and things wear out, they'll be doing the replacements, working on that kind of stuff. It says there, fulfill obligations of the Israelites. It's an interesting statement. Let's see kind of what that means. They're given to the high priest, but could not serve as priests. Okay? They're to serve as the Redeemer. And this is what I was talking about. If y'all remember back in Exodus 13, we looked at, let's look back there just a minute. Exodus 13:2. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb, among the children of Israel, both man and beast, it is mine. And further down in the chapter, verses 11 through 16, it talks some more about the law of the firstborn. Let's see, verse 12, he set apart to the Lord all that open the womb, that is, every firstborn that comes from man which you have, the male shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey shall redeem with the lamb. And if they couldn't, they were to break his neck. The last part of chapter, verse 13, and all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So they got that instruction, but way back in Exodus, they weren't really told how to redeem their sons. This is it. This is the redemption of their sons. It's through the Levites. They were taken by the Lord as the redemption instead of the firstborn males of all the other Israelites. To do that, the Lord told them to count the Levites 1 month and older. So Moses and Aaron get a count of them. There's 22,000. Now the Israelites of the same age were counted and their names were listed. So they even went to the level of writing down each one of them's names. 22,273 were counted. Not Levites, but Israelites. 1 month and older. That were to be redeemed, firstborn. Okay? So the Levites were taken instead of these firstborn, but they also had to give the firstlings of their livestock also. But if you did the math, which is pretty simple, you end up with 273 extra for these extra for the redemption of the Levites. God tells them that 5 shekels were to be given to Aaron. So you see the redemption. The Levites' life was dedicated to the Lord. Their occupation, their living, their way of life was dedicated to the Lord for all these other Israelites. And that's the redemption that they had through the Levites that God was talking about way back, how the firstborn would be redeemed. Their life didn't have to be given by the Levites. They're organized and their duties are given. The campsites on the east were Moses, Aaron, and his sons. You remember that's the gate that goes into the courtyard. On the south was the clan of Kohath, or the family of Kohath and his clans. On the west were Gershon and his clans, and on the north were Merari. This is another picture. This represents, I'm sorry, this is hard to see. So you have Moses, Aaron, his sons here, Kohath, Gershon, and Merari. I got a better picture here. There we go. That's better. That's easier to read. Tabernacle, tribes around it. East is this way. Here's your Judah, which is the camp of Judah, Zebulun, and Issachar, camp of Reuben on the south, Ephraim on the west, north, Dan on the north. And inside of their camps, right next to the tabernacle courtyard, on the east side, of the tribes of Levi, Moses, Aaron, and the sons of Aaron were to be on the east side. Kohath, sons of Kohath on the south, Gershon on the west, and Merari on the north side. They were counted again, not just the ones 1 month and older, but they were counted by clans for duties. Okay, so it's another counting of the Levites for different purposes. Those that were 30 to 50 years old were to be used in transporting the tabernacle. But some of the other duties that were needed, maybe perhaps, don't know, but maybe perhaps the polishing of the stuff or some of the repairs could be done if they were 25 to 50 years old. So that's one of the difference in the ages there. The Gershonites were in charge of the curtains. Remember, we had the curtain between the holiest places, and then the curtain outside the tabernacle at the entrance. Excuse me. were in charge of the curtains that hung between, well, the veil which hung between the holy and the holiest of holiest was actually taken down by the priest, usually the high priest. And it was used to cover the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat, which was on top of the covenant. Y'all remember that the Ark of the Covenant mercy seat, once it was taken in the first time, it would probably never be seen by the 99.9% of these people. So it's just, they got to see it going in. They won't ever get to see it again. But they're also the one that entrance to the tabernacle, they would be in charge of that. The coverings over the tabernacle, they would be in charge of those. The white curtain around the courtyard and the multicolored curtains for the entrance to the courtyard, the Gershonites were to do that. They were given 2 wagons and 4 oxen to haul that stuff, all that material around. Who remembers where those oxen and wagons came from? They were given by the princes of the tribe. Y'all remember from a couple of classes ago, the 12 princes brought offerings, and some of the things they brought was they brought 12 oxen. Is that right? 12 oxen for each tribe, and then 6 wagons. So this is what they were brought for, so that they could move this tabernacle. It was portable. It was a tent. It was to be moved. They were supervised by Ithamar, one of Aaron's sons. Right? The Kohathites, they were to care for and portage of the furniture, which would be the Ark of the Covenant, the altar of incense, the lampstand, the table of showbread, and the altar of burnt offering, and all the utensils that went along with that stuff. There were certain things that went with the lampstand, of course, the oil and how they lit it, and things of that nature. There's table of showbread, some things along with that, and of course lots of tools and stuff for offerings at the altar of burnt offering. These were not to be used, not to be carried on wagons. They were to be carried by foot on their shoulders. Y'all remember table of showbread had poles on it. The altar of incense had poles on it. The Ark of the Covenant had poles on it, so they could carry these things. The lampstand didn't. There was a lampstand, but wasn't designed to have poles. All these things were to be carried by hand, by foot. They were supervised by Eleazar, Aaron's other son. Merarites would be the ones picking up the boards. If y'all remember, the sides of the tabernacle were boards that were laced together with poles. Of course, a lot of this fencing and the poles used in the fencing would have cords and stakes for that. The pillars, y'all remember, they had 4 pillars in front of the holiest of holy places and 5 in front of the tabernacle. So they'd get those pillars picked up, and all the posts that were used to hold the court curtain up. So they had more wagons and more oxen, because this would be pretty heavy stuff, a lot of stuff, a lot heavier to move than material, I would think. And so they had more wagons and oxen to do that. They were also supervised by Ithamar. So that's the duties. They're consecrated. The consecration of the priest is to be ceremonially clean and set apart for the work. To do this, they were sprinkled with purifying water, their body was shaved, and their clothes was washed. And they were presented in front of the tabernacles. The Israelites laid their hand on the Levites, and Aaron was to present a wave offering to them. If y'all remember, the wave offering was an offering where it was offered up to the Lord and then back. And you see why. You know, if it was really a true redemption of these Levites, they would offer to the Lord, and that would be the end of it. But it being a wave offering, it was offered to the Lord, that they could use the Levites for the service of the tabernacle. So they didn't lose their life. They were dedicated to the Lord. A special sacrifice for them with 2 bulls that were offered, one for sin offering, one for burnt offering, and a grain offering. And this applied to the Levites who were 25 to 50 years old. Once they hit 50, they were to retire. They weren't to do this service anymore. And they could do no other work. They weren't to have an outside occupation. They could help some other Israelites in some of their obligations. They weren't actually working another job. The rules for the priests in Leviticus 21. Don't turn over there. Let's talk some about that. Leviticus 21. No one was to defile themselves for a dead person among his people, except for his nearest relatives. That's the only time. So they couldn't defile themselves with somebody that was dead other than their nearest relative. Let's see. Just some of them. I won't cover all of them. We don't have time. He wasn't to mar himself by cutting his hair or his beard or cut his flesh for the dead. They were to be holy and must not profane the name of the Lord. They weren't to marry a profane woman, one that was profaned by harlotry, or one divorced from her husband. If a daughter of the priest profaned herself by harlotry, she profaned her father, and she was to be burned with fire. No man with a defect could be service priest. So blind, lame, disfigured, deformed, broken limbs couldn't serve. 10 through 15 talk about some specific rules for the high priest. He couldn't uncover his head, tear his clothes, or approach a dead person, even for a close relative. Could not go out of the sanctuary, nor profane it. Let's take a virgin from his own people for his wife, so he wouldn't profane his children. Couldn't take a widow. So those were just some of them. We don't have time to look at those a whole lot, but just want to call your attention to them. Signals for the congregation. Now we had the cloud fire signal. It hovered above the tabernacle, particularly above the mercy seat. Same thing that had led them out of Egypt. When it lifted from the tabernacle, that's when Israel knew it was time for them to set out and follow. So that was there. It's been there since they left Egypt. Still there. Still leading them. And this is just the picture I drew in there. At nighttime, it was fire. They also had silver trumpets for signals. There were 2 of beaten silver, and the priests were to sound these. If both the trumpets were sounding, it was a sound for them to gather at the tabernacle for the whole group. If one was sounding, it was for the heads of the clans to gather at the tabernacle for something, information or something. If it was a long blast, the camps were to move out. Short, sharp blasts were called to assemble. So that's what the trumpets were used for notification. They were used to alarm for enemy attack. They were used to call them to the feasts that were to observe, for festivals, sometimes for special worship where they needed to make some special sacrifices. They would be used for that. So they had these trumpets made of silver that the priests were to blow at the appropriate time. Blessings and curses of Leviticus 26. And I just want to point this out to you. I hope you can read through these at your leisure. Leviticus 26 is what God has promised in the Israelites. Remember, we've been through all this with setting up the tabernacle, getting the laws. And he's setting up these. He says, if you are faithful, he gives them a huge list of blessings on verses 1 through 13. And y'all can read through those. He says, if you're unfaithful, then all these curses will happen to you. But if you confess your sins, they'll forgive you. And that's what this chapter basically covers. I don't want to go through all the ins and outs of it, because it's time to leave Mount Sinai. On the 20th day of the second month in the second year, the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle. The children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai. And it's to be continued with their story. But we wanted to get to this. I thought this would be a good time for a review, because a lot has happened. I got people, tell me why I got to have them up here. What about Joseph? Where is Joseph? He alive? He's dead. Where is he? So he's been carried around by the Israelites, probably in a sarcophagus, probably mummified. Probably. We don't know that from Scripture. But the Egyptians put their dead in sarcophaguses and mummified them. And Joseph was a high-ranking official in Egypt, so he was probably in a sarcophagus mummified. All right, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. This one's probably gone by now. There's still pharaohs in Egypt. They will continue to be for years and years. But that's what we started our story out with, the Pharaoh who had forgotten the significance of the favor. No favor was shown to Joseph anymore. And he didn't much care for the Israelites and their worship. Here's a good one. I know Jeff knows this one. He wrote an article on Shifran Hua. What? Midwives, that's right. Midwives. These were the midwives that Pharaoh wanted when the Israelite babies were being born. He wanted them to get there and kill them as they were being born. But they weren't successful in that, because the Hebrew or Israelite women were so strong. They were having their babies without the need of a midwife. And they couldn't get there, or didn't prefer not to get there, and wouldn't do it. So these are two midwives. Of course, Moses, we've got a lot we can say about him. So, yeah, Pharaoh's daughter. Why not have her up here? Yep, she's the one that picked up baby Moses in the basket. All right. Amram. Who's Amram? Moses' daddy. Yep, father Moses. Took a bed. Moses' mother. Okay. Rule. Moses' father-in-law. Okay. What was it for? Moses' wife, daughter of Reuel. Reuel was a Midianite. All right. Jethro. Reuel's other name, right? Okay. Here's something. First son of Moses, Eliezer, not Eleazar, but Eliezer, is Moses' other son. Aaron, Moses' older brother, who's now the high priest. Levi was one of the 12 sons. This is where the priests came from. We just talked about these three, and we've listed them a long time ago. I think I did this in lesson 4. I said, remember these folks because they come up again. Well, here they are. Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. We just talked about them. Korah. Ben talked about him. He's later on. But he's like Moses' nephew, something like that, cousin, something. He'll come up later. Nadab and Abihu, we talked about him a couple lessons ago. They are deceased now. Offered strange fire, Aaron's sons. Of course, the other two sons, Eleazar, in charge of one of the groups when they was moving out. Ithamar, in charge of two of the groups of Israelites as they were moving out, or the Levites. Phinehas. I can't remember why I have him up there. Yeah. Oh, I think I have him up there. Hold on. Elders were elders of the tribes. Foremen were the leaders of the Israelites that went to Pharaoh when they were getting more tasks put on them. We kind of see that, well, magicians were Pharaoh's folks. Joshua fought against the Amalekites. Will be the next leader of Israel. Moses' aide. Did a lot with Moses, did a lot for Moses. Yep. Now let's hear more about him. Her helped hold up Moses' hands. Something else we heard about him too, but I can't remember. Somebody sent it through him, but which just won't come to me now. Amalek, king of the Amalekites. We talked a little about them in this lesson. Bezalel and Aholiab. Now, this wasn't that long ago. Who are these two guys? Yeah, they were skilled workers, and God blessed them with skill so they could do the job and teach others to do the job too. That's good. I remember that one. 12 princes we talked about. What about Mishael and Elzaphan? This was kind of hard. Mishael and Elzaphan. You know this one, you've done good. They were the two men that buried Nadab and Abihu. Put them outside. That's all I got. We won't go through the places. We're out of time. Thank you.